Hey guys, and welcome to another little book roundup where I talk briefly about some of the books that I've read recently and why you might like them, without really spoiling them, of course. But firstly, I'd like to say thank you to all the people that supported my last Humble Bundle review. It was really amazing to see all the great feedback on that, and honestly, I'm just happy that so many people watched the video and enjoyed it. For those of you who like my reviews or gaming content, rest assured that I'm working on another game review to be released probably within the next 1 to 2 weeks. One hint on that game, kind of a sneak preview if you're watching this video, monkeys. That's all I'm going to say. That's it for the intro. Let's just get right into talking about some books. So The Forever War by Joe Haldeman takes place in the near future, in which an alien species dubbed the Taurans are discovered when they apparently attack a human colonist ship. William Mandela is a physics student conscripted for an expeditionary force assembled to strike back against them. This book is widely thought to be basically a response to Heinlein's Starship Troopers that I talked about in my last book review video. In this book, war is not a noble goal that Heinlein portrayed. This book shows how war and violence dehumanizes people and alienates them from society, rather than it being something to glorify. The use of sci-fi elements to show this is pretty awesome and unique. So the gist of it is that every time that Mandela's group of soldiers goes out to fight, due to the effects of relativistic travel, they come back to an Earth and human society which has culturally shifted a lot from when they last left, sometimes decades or even centuries. I won't really spoil what these changes are, but they get more and more extreme towards the climax as the distances Mandela's group have to travel increase, and their lost time due to relativity subsequently also increases. And so the increasing cultural separation between Mandela and humanity as he returns to after every tour mirrors the PTSD that soldiers feel when returning home. There are a lot more themes about war here, but this is the really big one that kind of frames the whole story. I think this is definitely a must-read for any sci-fi fan, maybe even more so than Starship Troopers, because the ideas and themes that Haldeman puts forth in this book are, in my opinion, much more morally correct than those that Heinlein purports in Starship Troopers. And also, considering Haldeman served in the Vietnam War, you can kind of see how his experience relates to many things that happen in the book once you read it. The next book is Old Man's War by John Scalzi. So the premise of this book is that once people age to the age of 75, they are able to enlist in the colonial defense forces and kind of fight for humanity's place in the universe. The reason for the age requirement being so high is that in a future where biotechnology has advanced to the point where people can basically overcome aging in the CDF, life experience is much more valuable than youthful vigor and, being strong, right? So once people serve and survive their time in the military, they're allowed to have a place in one of the colonies with a new young body. So it's kind of like a new start, right? Once you serve your time. The book kind of portrays a realist version of interstellar politics. The races of the galaxy are pretty much constantly at war with each other and forming shifting alliances in order to compete over the limited number of habitable planets. As a political science student, this was a little bit interesting of a premise because it's more like, we have different kind of areas of political science, so this kind of catered towards a realist, whereas, something like Star Trek or anything with like a galactic senate or like high ideals, is more of an internationalist or idealist perspectives. There are no galactic senates or high ideals here. Hostile aliens will invade a human colony and set up a human meat farm to harvest meat, showing hundreds of ways to cook a human on their version of a cooking show. Our human forces will smash a competing civilization's infrastructure from orbit to dust in order to create a societal collapse that sets them back decades and allows humanity to expand, at the cost of them having, famines and civil wars and unrest. So it can be really gory and dark, but it also has a great sense of humor when it's appropriate. John Scalzi really has a great writing voice. The characters feel and talk so much like real people. It really helps you get invested in the characters and really captures you in the story. This is a real page turner. You could easily pick this book up and finish it in 1 or 2 days because of just how interesting it is. It's a really great introduction to the Old Man's War universe, and I'm definitely going to pick up the future books in the series when I have the chance. So I'm going to cover these next 2 books together because they're from the same trilogy. So these books are The Swarm and the Hive by Orson Scott Card and Aaron Johnson. And these books are from the second Formic War trilogy in the Ender's Game universe. The third book hasn't been released yet, so these are just the first two. If you haven't read Ender's Game and the original 4 books yet, I really recommend you do. It's hard to choose a favorite book because there are just so many amazing books, but Ender's Game is definitely high on the list for me at least. So both the first Formic War and second Formic War trilogies are basically prequels to the first set of books. In Ender's Game, we're introduced to this world that has been invaded twice, but decently in the past, so the world has recovered and has been running on a wartime system for quite some time. But in these trilogies, we really get to see how Earth got to that point and, what started it all. Because we always heard about the first and second invasions and the scouring of China and, all that juicy lore stuff. And this is the chance that we get to see it, right? So it's a bit hard to talk about the plot of these books in a way that won't spoil, because this trilogy comes right after another one, so the first Formic War, right? So this is the second, these books are in the second trilogy of a prequel trilogy, right? So it's a little bit hard, they're in a pretty awkward place to describe them at. So I'm going to kind of leave the plot and kind of even the basic premise a little bit out of this. These books are definitely good to read if you like Ender's Game, but also great if you like hard sci-fi. So the original Ender's Game was pretty realistic, besides a few notable technologies like the Ansible. And so this series is a set a little bit further in the past. I think it's like 100 years. And it feels a lot more close to our level of technology, because even Ender's Game was kind of similar, like realistically close to our level of technology within the next 400 years or whatever. But this kind of being like 2nd century or something, it feels, much more familiar to home. So it's a lot more realistic in terms of, hard sci-fi. And you also get to learn a lot more about the hegemony and the politics that lead to the world of Ender's Game, which I really like because I love that world building, and also I'd kind of like all this hypotheticals about a world government and what would it be like if all the nations of the world had to unite together, what kind of bureaucratic issues would there be, how would different nations be competing and perceiving themselves within this new system. I think it's really interesting, and yeah, if you like Ender's Game, check these books out. So this book roundup is just about done. This is the last book on the list. This is definitely a lot shorter than my last one because it's just covering from basically January to February, rather than my other one, which was 13 books pretty much for the whole year. So this is the 5th book, and it is How the World Thinks by Julian Baggini. This one was given to me by my Nana, so thank you very much for that, Nana. I really enjoyed it, and I took a whole notebook of notes. I could grab it, but I don't know where it is, so... but yeah, it was definitely a little bit more of a different book. Like the other books on here were sci-fi fiction. This is more of a philosophy book, which I haven't, talked about many of them in my actual videos, but I've actually read quite a few philosophy books in my days. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed this one. This book kind of focuses around different philosophies around the world, their similarities, differences, and how they relate to one another. It particularly focuses on the Indian, Japanese, Chinese, Muslim, and Western strands of philosophy. It talks a little bit about the others, like some African philosophy and Russian philosophy, and it goes into Maori philosophy for a little bit, but those are the primary ones. This is not really a textbook type treatise that will teach you everything about these philosophies in depth, so don't expect that. It's written to be approachable to a general audience, and it has a lot of ground to cover, so it explains enough about the philosophies to compare or contrast them, or what have you, or make the point that it's making. Not to say it isn't intelligent or enlightening, but it's just not university level dense. So you could use this book as a reference point to jump into these other philosophical traditions in greater depth if you're interested enough, as it provides a lot of references to various authors and texts throughout the ages. I definitely think I'm going to be doing that sometime in the future. So this book is great because it really helps you understand different modes of thinking around the world and why they are prevalent and held. Even as somebody who's had the fortunate circumstances enough to travel extensively in my life and talk and make friends with many people from over the world, I found the insights of this book quite enlightening. As people don't tend to talk about in a meta sense about their implicit assumptions, right? So you can talk to a lot of people from all over the world, but you don't necessarily learn why it is that they think certain ways, right? So for example, how Chinese philosophy emphasizes harmony rather than, say, liberty, or how Indian and Buddhist schools of thought bring forth conceptions of reality based off of karma, and kind of how those little differences in how we think and prioritize and kind of arrange our thoughts kind of change the outcomes of how we act in the, our everyday lives, right? So the book also focuses a lot on breaking down the traditional Western-centric perception on philosophy, highlighting the similarities and differences between the different philosophical traditions, and underlining both the strengths and weaknesses of Western philosophy. One good example of this was when Begini discussed reductionism, which is a key component of Western philosophic assumptions. The idea is that the best way to understand something is to break it down into its constituent parts, whether that's breaking down chemicals into base elements or engaging in moral arguments by breaking the issue down into base principles. It's a very useful tool, but there's often an overemphasis on its usefulness. Some situations do require taking a look at the whole rather than the parts, and he gives some poignant examples from the medicine and psychology fields to illustrate this. I think just off the top of my head, one of them was like how when they discovered serotonin was a part of depression, there's a lot of drugs kind of like focusing heavily on like balancing serotonin levels, and for some people this worked, but it wasn't really like a catch-all solution. So it kind of, he kind of put this forth as like the idea that like people thought, once we had this drug, it would like solve depression, right? But you can't really break down depression into just simply lack of serotonin, because there's like other ways that people can be depressed other than that like imbalance of serotonin, right? So that was definitely, a really cool example of that, and just an example of how he might break down our traditional conceptions of how to think about a problem. Not to say that he doesn't highlight the weaknesses and peculiarities of other philosophies, though. He does. It's just that this book focuses a little bit more on doing that for Western philosophy, because it's, for a Western audience, and it's trying to show Western readers that, our philosophical tradition isn't as universal as we might think, and, that we shouldn't regard other philosophies as kind of local oddities or not true philosophy. He brings up really early on in the book that, like, if you go into a philosophy department in a lot of universities, it'll literally only be Western philosophy when, philosophy is something all over the world, right? Not just in the West. So I've talked a lot about this book, so I'll just wrap it up by saying that if you're interested in philosophy or even just learning more about different cultures around the world, I think this is a very good book to pick up, and I think you'd enjoy it. Well, that about wraps up this book roundup. Thank all of you guys for watching, and if you're still here, it would be really nice if you could like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video or just found it interesting. My next book review video is probably going to be coming a decent ways off, but I'm really looking forward to that one because it's going to be about a whole bunch of Star Wars books. I got a bunch of Star Wars books for Christmas, and I've been working through them, so yeah, I'm going to probably make a whole video just about those. So far I've pretty much enjoyed all of those Star Wars books, so it's going to be good. Well, that about wraps it up for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one.